There is a nation on the eastern edge of Asia, an archipelago of four main islands, sitting at the precise meeting point of ancient civilization and cutting-edge modernity, where the same city that houses the world's most advanced robotics laboratories also preserves 800-year-old wooden temples with the same meticulous care, where a salaryman in a crisp business suit stops to bow respectfully at a roadside shrine on his way to work in a semiconductor plant, where schoolchildren grow up reading manga comic books that have sold more copies than any other print series in the history of the world, and where a single media franchise invented in the 1990s has accumulated more revenue than Star Wars, the Marvel Universe, and every James Bond film combined, and that nation is Japan, a country of approximately 125 million people that has, over the course of the last 2 centuries, performed one of the most astonishing national transformations in recorded history, reinventing itself not once but twice, first from a medieval feudal society into a modern industrial power, and then from the ashes of devastating defeat in World War II into the world's third largest economy and one of the most creatively productive and technologically innovative civilizations on Earth, a nation whose influence on global culture, global technology, and global imagination is so profound and so pervasive that it touches the daily lives of billions of people who have never set foot on Japanese soil, through the anime they watch, the cars they drive, the video games they play, and the timeless traditions of beauty, discipline, and mindfulness that Japan has shared with the world. To understand Japan, you must first understand the extraordinary depth of its history, because Japan is not merely a modern nation that happens to have old buildings. It is a civilization whose cultural roots run back thousands of years to the prehistoric Jomon period, one of the world's earliest known pottery-making cultures, and whose recorded history stretches through the Nara period, the Heian period, the age of the samurai, the Tokugawa shogunate, and into the modern era, a continuous thread of cultural development that produced some of the most refined and distinctive artistic, philosophical, and social traditions in the history of humanity. The Heian period, lasting from 794 to 1185, is considered the golden age of classical Japanese culture, producing not only the tale of Genji, widely recognized as the world's first novel, but also the practice of hanami, the tradition of gathering beneath cherry blossom trees to appreciate their fleeting beauty, a custom so ancient that farmers in Japan first observed cherry blossoms as a sacred sign of good fortune coinciding with the rice planting season, and that by the Heian period had become so deeply embedded in Japanese identity that the word hanami itself became synonymous with sakura, cherry blossoms, a tradition that today draws over 63 million people to cherry blossom festivals across Japan every year, and whose influence extended so far that in 1912, Japan sent thousands of cherry trees as a gift of friendship to the United States, where they now line the tidal basin in Washington, D.C., and bloom every spring in a living symbol of Japanese cultural diplomacy. The tea ceremony, known in Japanese as Chado or Chanoyu, is another tradition whose roots reach back to the same Heian period, when Buddhist monks first brought tea from China to Japan, and over the centuries that followed, the ritual of preparing and drinking green tea evolved into one of the world's most profound expressions of mindfulness, simplicity, and human connection, a codified practice steeped in Zen Buddhism that the National Geographic has described as shaped by samurai, statesmen, and scholars alike, elevating the simple act of sharing tea into an art form that teaches presence, humility, and the appreciation of transient beauty, values that are not merely aesthetic preferences in Japan, but the philosophical foundation upon which the entire culture is built, expressed in the concept of wabi-sabi, the acceptance and appreciation of imperfection and impermanence, and in the concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the passing of things, the same. Emotional quality that makes cherry blossoms so meaningful to the Japanese because they bloom for only a brief, perfect moment before falling. The samurai warrior class, who served noble houses from the Heian period onward and reached the peak of their power during the Sengoku and Edo periods, lived according to a strict code of conduct called Bushido, the way of the warrior, which consisted of 7 core values including courage, respect, honor, and loyalty, a code so deeply ingrained in Japanese character that its echoes can be felt today in the extraordinary work ethic, loyalty to institutions, and dedication to craft and excellence that characterize Japanese society across every field from manufacturing to animation to cuisine. Japan's cuisine is itself one of the country's most powerful gifts to the world. a cuisine so refined in its techniques, so precise in its seasonal sensibility, and so deeply rooted in the principles of freshness and natural flavor that in 2013 UNESCO inscribed traditional Japanese cuisine, known as washoku, onto its representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And today, Japan holds 26 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in total, including the sacred peak of Mount Fuji, the ancient temples of Kyoto, and the castle complex of Himeji, along with 23 UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritages, a concentration of recognized cultural significance that reflects the extraordinary breadth and depth of what Japan has preserved and contributed to human civilization. Sushi and ramen have become the twin ambassadors of Japanese cuisine around the world, and the statistics behind their global popularity tell a remarkable story. In a 2025 survey of foreign tourists visiting Japan, ramen surpassed even sushi to claim the top spot as the most beloved Japanese food, with the ramen restaurant market in Japan reaching a record high of approximately $790 billion in its most recent fiscal year, making it 60% larger than the sushi restaurant market, while researchers at Nippon.com found that the most common Japanese food tried internationally because of anime is ramen, with ramen eating scenes in countless anime series having directly inspired millions of fans around the world to seek out authentic Japanese noodle bowls, a perfect example of how Japan's cultural exports reinforce and amplify each other in a continuous cycle of global influence. And this brings us to the phenomenon that has, in the 21st century, become Japan's single most powerful instrument of global cultural projection, anime, Japanese animation that began with Japan producing its first animated short films in the 1910s, went through decades of development, and was then utterly transformed in the 1960s by one extraordinary individual. Osamu Tezuka, revered today as the god of manga and the father of modern anime, whose creation of Astro Boy, a story about a robot boy with a human heart, introduced the large expressive eyes, the cinematic storytelling, and the emotional depth that would become the defining visual and narrative language of Japanese animation, establishing a tradition of animated storytelling so distinctive and so powerful that it has since conquered audiences on every continent. Studio Ghibli, founded on June 15, 1985 by master directors Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata, elevated anime to the level of high art, producing films of such breathtaking visual beauty and such profound emotional intelligence that Spirited Away, Miyazaki's 2001 masterpiece, won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature in 2003, the only non-English language animated film ever to do so at that time, and as Time magazine noted, made Japanese animation a more global film genre rather than very niche, opening the gates for anime to spread far beyond its original fan base into the mainstream of world cinema, a journey that culminated in 2024 when Ghibli won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature again, this time with The Boy and the Heron, demonstrating that the studio's power to move global audiences has only grown with time. The numbers behind Japan's anime industry are staggering. According to Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, Japan's anime industry reached an all-time high of $25 billion in total market value in 2024, surging 14.8% in a single year, while the anime market outside Japan increased by a record 26% in 2024, according to Crunchyroll, and the global demand for anime has surged by an extraordinary 118% overall, with anime having established itself by 2021 as the third most in-demand TV genre in the entire world, a remarkable achievement for a distinctly national art form rooted in the specific cultural experiences and aesthetic sensibilities of a single island nation. The franchise records set by Japanese anime and manga are almost impossible to comprehend in their scale. One Piece, the manga series created by Eiichiro Oda that has been published since 1997, holds the Guinness World Record for the most copies published for the same comic book series by a single author, with over 516.6 million copies in circulation worldwide by August 2022, making it not only the best-selling manga series in history, but the best-selling comic series of any kind ever produced by any creator anywhere on Earth, while both Dragon Ball and Naruto have each sold over 100 million copies, according to Oricon Japan's July 2025 report. And yet even these astounding numbers are overshadowed by the greatest commercial achievement in the history of Japanese popular culture, which is the Pokemon franchise created by Satoshi Tajiri and first launched in 1996, which has generated over $113.7 billion in total all-time revenue from games, trading cards, television series, and films, making Pokémon the single highest-grossing media franchise in the history of human entertainment, surpassing every other franchise on Earth, including Star Wars, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Harry Potter, and Disney, a fact so extraordinary that it bears repeating. A Japanese franchise about a boy who collects friendly monsters and pocket-sized balls is, by total revenue, the most commercially successful creative property our species has ever produced. Japan's technological achievements are equally extraordinary and equally world-defining, rooted in the same spirit of meticulous craftsmanship, continuous improvement, the concept of Kaizen, and long-term vision that shapes every aspect of Japanese culture. Japan's technological modernization began with the Meiji Restoration on January 3, 1868, when Emperor Meiji was restored to political power, and Japan launched one of the most astonishing national transformations in history, rapidly industrializing, building railways and factories, adopting Western science and institutions while preserving its own cultural identity, and within just 4 decades transforming from a feudal society into a major industrial and colonial power. And that same relentless drive to master and improve technology continued through the 20th century, when Japan emerged from the devastation of World War II to produce what historians call the Japanese economic miracle, the period between roughly 1960 and 1985, during which real income per person in Japan grew at rates that astonished the entire world, propelling Japan from the ruins of defeat to become, by the late 1960s, the second largest economy on Earth and the global leader in consumer electronics, automobiles, and precision manufacturing. The companies that Japan built during this era are among the most iconic and consequential in the history of business. Sony, founded in 1946 as Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo by visionaries Masaru Ibuka and Akio Morita, renamed Sony Corporation in 1958, and growing into the company that introduced the world to the Walkman, the transistor radio, the Trinitron television, and in 1991, the first commercial lithium-ion battery that made modern smartphones and laptops possible, and then with the launch of the first PlayStation console in Japan in December 1994, revolutionized the entire video game industry with 3D graphics and optical disc technology, creating the gaming ecosystem that Sony still leads today as the world's largest video game console company. Nintendo, meanwhile, has a history that surprises almost everyone who hears it. Founded in 1889 in Kyoto by Fusajiro Yamauchi as a manufacturer of hand-painted playing cards called Hanafuda, Nintendo spent its first century transforming from a card company into a taxi company, into a love hotel chain, into a toy maker before finally pivoting to video games in the late 1970s and producing Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, and Pokémon, 3 of the most recognized intellectual properties on Earth, building arguably the most beloved library of original game characters and universes in the history of the medium. Toyota, Japan's automotive giant, has become the world's best argument that quality, reliability, and continuous improvement can defeat any competitor in any market on Earth. And in 2025, Toyota retained its crown as the world's top-selling automaker for a 3rd consecutive year, reporting record global sales of 11.3 million vehicles, according to Reuters, Bloomberg, and CNBC, with global sales rising 4.6% from the prior year and production climbing 5.7% to 11.2 million units, cementing a position of automotive dominance that reflects the same Kaizen philosophy of relentless incremental perfection that made Japan's manufacturing sector a global benchmark. Japan is also the world's #1 industrial robot manufacturer according to the International Federation of Robotics, and the automotive sector's robot density, 1,531 robots per 10,000 employees, represents the highest level of industrial automation in any major manufacturing industry in the world, while Japan's AI market, valued at $6.6 billion in 2024, is projected to surge to $35.2 billion by 2033, reflecting Japan's determined effort to maintain its position as a global technology leader in the era of artificial intelligence, even as it confronts the challenges of a declining population and labor shortage that are themselves accelerating Japan's push toward automation and robotics. Japan was ranked 12th in the Global Innovation Index 2025 by the World Intellectual Property Organization, a position that reflects both the enormous creative and technological output of a nation that continues to produce world-class innovations across pharmaceuticals, materials science, robotics, semiconductor manufacturing, and consumer electronics, and also the challenge that Japan faces in competing with the sheer scale and investment of the United States and China in the most capital-intensive sectors of the new digital economy. Yet what no index can fully capture is the immeasurable cultural capital that Japan has accumulated through its anime, its food, its design philosophy, and its timeless traditions, a cultural wealth that reaches into the hearts of hundreds of millions of people worldwide, and that makes Japan not merely a technology power or an economic power, but one of the most deeply and genuinely beloved nations on Earth, a civilization that has been creating beauty, meaning, and innovation for thousands of years, and that continues in the 21st century to prove that tradition and modernity are not opposites to be traded against each other, but complementary dimensions of a single extraordinary national identity.